How's everyone today? Y'all doing good? Diane's great to hear, so great way to start off the morning. My name is Lizzie Shake-Snyder, and I am the Professional Development Manager here at the LLA, and just so happy to be here with you guys today. It's such a pleasure to see some returning faces and some new faces. I wanted to introduce our next presenter. They're going to be doing the cybersecurity update. Our first instructor is Chris Magee. Chris is a data analytics manager for our office at the LLA in the Performance Audit Section Services. Chris has been with the LLA since 2012 and has worked on various audits that utilize data, analytics to evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of programs and to identify possible improper payments, fraud, waste, and abuse. In 2023, the LLA was awarded the National State Auditors Association Excellence in Accountability Performance Audit Award for Chris's report, Louisiana Department of State Election Integrity. Chris helped to implement new policies at the LLA regarding obtaining, classifying, storing, sharing, and securing data. Chris's professional certifications include Certified Internal Auditor, Certified Government Auditing Professional, and Certified Fraud Examiner. Chris has a Bachelor's of Science in Management and Marketing from Louisiana College and a Master's in Business Administration from Louisiana State University. This is Chris. Yay! And our other instructor is Brent McDougall. Brent is a senior data analyst with LLA's Performance Audit Services section. Also, Brent has been with the LLA since 2006. Prior to moving to performance audit, Brent worked as a forensic IT audit coordinator and investigative audit services with our office. Brent has worked on various audits, which include data analytics to evaluate programs such as Medicaid and unemployment insurance to improve their efficiency and effectiveness and to identify possible improper payments, fraud, waste, and abuse. In 2015 and 2017, the LLA was awarded the National State Auditors Association Excellence in Accountability Forensic Report Award for Brent's report of the New Orleans Traffic Court and the Orleans Parish Sheriff. Brent has also helped to implement new policies at the LLA regarding obtaining, classifying, storing, sharing, and securing data. Brent's professional certifications include Certified Internal Auditor, Certified Fraud Examiner, and EnCE Certified Examiner. Brent has a Bachelor's in Science in Mass Communication from Louisiana State University and a Master's of Business Administration degree from Southeastern Louisiana University. Y'all give him a hand. It's going to be a great day.
Thank you, Lizzie, for that introduction. As you heard there, Brent and I have done and worked on a lot of various types of projects throughout the state, but on a day-to-day basis, IT and really the topic that we're going to talk about today is not really our specialty. We do handle and work with a lot of data internally, and we've worked with our IT section and our legal section on really how we can make sure that all the extensive data that we have, which has a lot of personally identifying information, health information, and things like that, is secure and really only in the hands of those auditors who need access to it. And so, how are we qualified to speak about this today? You may be wondering. On a day-to-day basis, performance auditors, which both of us are, go into programs that we really don't know a lot about in some instances. We learn about them at a hyper speed. We then learn about best practices, what to do, what not to do, and then ultimately what we do is make recommendations to the agencies of how they can implement everything that we learned and saw throughout our work. And that's really the approach that we took to this class today. We think about cybersecurity somewhat as we're going through our daily basis, really as a general employee would. And that's what the majority of the people here are today. It's not really our day-to-day focus. However, it really should be a day-to-day focus for everyone. And that's what we want to talk about. We really learned throughout this that there is a wealth of information out there, almost an overwhelming amount of information out there regarding cybersecurity. And so what we really wanted to do is condense this down into the hour that we have to give you really a lot of information about why this is important and some of the common scams and different things like that. But really the most important thing that Brent's going to go over is how do we prevent and detect these issues? What do we do whenever a cybersecurity incident actually does occur? And then what we'll do at the end is kind of drive this home with some real world examples from local governments in Louisiana who've actually had some of these issues occur to them. And so kind of a class overview here. We're going to talk about a lot of the things that I just discussed there. But really that prevention and detection is the key part of what we're going to go over. So why is this important? So what we want to do is just give some statistics and things of why this relates and how it is so important for local government. Local governments are often identified as an easy target or a main target of the bad actors that exist out there. There are unfortunately bad actors who this is their only role in life. This is the job that they have taken to try to get this information and ultimately get paid for it or do some harm to government or other entities that they have. And so sometimes in local government, we are, as Ms. Allison was just talking about, we're having to balance our budget and try to figure out what we do and don't spend money on. And in some cases, technologies and other things like that that can help prevent some of these bad actors from getting in are some of the things that we kind of put on our back burner in terms of updating. And so outdated systems can lead to kind of a threat being increased for local government. And so really we, government employees, but also the local government employees are the first line of defense whenever it comes to detecting and preventing these cyber threats. And so that's what's really key and what we want to go over today. So every year when doing our research, the FBI puts out an internet crimes report, which is pretty interesting and disturbing at the same time whenever you go and look at it. And they put out various statistics, but one of the first ones that caught our eye were really the top three infrastructure, the three types of entities that get hit the most. And as you can see, government facilities, number 3. It makes sense because we have access to so much of our constituents' personally identifying information or potentially based on the local governmental entity, healthcare information as well. And so we're kind of checking a lot of boxes as government entities here to be a risky entity. So according to the report, the average cost of a cybersecurity attack is $4.5 million. And then there's various factors that increase those risks, such as remote work. So once the pandemic occurred, remote work became much more acceptable, much more usable on a day-to-day basis. But as you do that, working from home, your own internet system may not be as secure as it is at work. And so there's a variety of things that you need to think about whenever you have remote work and how to make sure that the same security plans that you have in place at your actual office are also in place whenever an employee works from home. Another interesting thing, the most basic issue that leads to these types of attacks is compromised credentials. So this is your basic username and password. And Brent's going to go over a few various ways and tips and tricks to kind of think about whenever it comes to making sure your credentials are secure. And then most importantly, like I talked about with the prevention and detection, those entities who have an incident response plan reduce the cost of their cyber attacks by 61%. And we're actually going to have an example later that talks about a city who had one. They still had some costs, but what could it have been if they didn't have a plan? So going with the same FBI Internet Crime Report, the top 5 types of crime, I know that in every cybersecurity training that I take, I get very tired of hearing about definitions and things such as phishing. However, this kind of drives home how important that is. Phishing was the top internet crime in 2022, and it was almost more than double the next 4 top combined. And so it really is important to understand how to stop this because from the bad actor perspective, it costs so little to perpetrate, and it really only takes one person to click on the link and ultimately have an incident occur. This also was interesting to us because it kind of shows the age ranges and the complaints and also the costs, most importantly. But the real reason we put this here is because our workforces comprise all of these age ranges. And these incidents can really occur to anyone. And so a slight bit of positive news, Louisiana ranks where they should be in terms of the number of attacks and cost of attacks. We are about 25th population-wise as a state, and we're a little lower than that whenever it comes to victims and the victims' losses. However, as you can see there, in 2022, over 4,000 victims at a cost of over $55 million. And these are just known incidents. There's many more unknown incidents. And so since 2019, the Division of Administration has had a cybersecurity group that responds to incidents that occur in your local government or at the state government level. And unfortunately, they've been busier than they expected. Each year over year, there are more attacks occurring that they're responding to and helping with, and the associated cost of that has gone up exponentially. And so one of the resources, and kind of throughout this presentation, the way we've tried to structure it is, as we talk about things, we want to also present you information because there's only so much we can talk about in an hour. But we want to make you aware of all the entities at a national, state, and local level that exist that can help you to create the types of plans that you need to thwart these attacks. And so at the national level, the leader is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And basically CISA, as they're known, they're the lead at the national level for preventing, detecting, and creating plans for these types of events. And the most important thing in your slides and online and down there, you'll see a hyperlink to something called a free cyber hygiene assessment. CISA has many, many resources on their website, free of charge to local, state, and federal government. But one of the most important and interesting things we found is that they will actually help you conduct assessments of the vulnerabilities that you have and try to identify recommendations for you to fix any of those vulnerabilities. So you can go to this link here, and it gives you a lot of information to try to schedule those types of things. And so with that, I know I've set up, the why it's important thing, but Brent's going to go into some scams, and then really the most important things. How do we prevent and detect these types of incidents?
Yeah. So in putting together a presentation, we were trying to kind of just come up with general areas that we could cover, the basics. I know a lot of this might be repetitive from other classes that you've had, but really you're going to see how important these things are when we get to our examples. Chris brought up phishing already. That's going to be one of the main things that we talk about, especially for our examples. The primary common scams that you're going to see for cybersecurity are going to be phishing, which is just the random receiving of emails or messages that are unsolicited from unknown or known sources, or what appear to be known sources, where they're trying to obtain your credentials for some sort of login, whether it's a banking website or really anything. Because one of the problems and people have with using their credentials is sometimes they use them over and over again. And so, you may think that someone trying to phish you for your Netflix account isn't a big deal until you realize that your Netflix user ID and password is the same for your bank. So that's why, you may not be thinking that it's that big of an issue, but you always need to be aware of what's going on and kind of keep an eye out for it. A lot of these scams also kind of blend in with one another. So for instance, the second one, ransomware, that's going to be where you have instances where malware is installed in your computer and it goes and encrypts your files. So not only can you not access those files, but then maybe the operating system on your machine won't work because the needed files are encrypted. And what tends to go along with the ransomware is they will demand a ransom in order to provide you with the encryption codes, but then at the same time, they may also be breaching your data, which is the next one, where someone actually gets into your system, steals the data, and we'll talk a little bit more about how some of these go together. But then also, when you have data breaches, you can also have incidents where the data that's taken is involved in the use of identity theft. And then spoofing, this really goes along primarily with phishing, where they send an email or a message of some kind, and they modify it so that the address that it looks like it's coming from is a good actual address, sometimes even internal. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. when actually it's coming from an outside unknown address. And so Chris brought it up, phishing is the #1 incident in 2022. And I know he talked about how the other 4 combined didn't even match it. But what's interesting to me is of the all of the incidents and all of the types, there's 27 types of cybercrimes. Phishing was 300,000, and all the other categories combined were only 424,000. So phishing is almost half of all the crimes, essentially, that were reported to the FBI for 2022. There's multiple types of phishing. These are the 4 main ones. Phishing just in general, kind of discussed that already. Spear phishing is a form of phishing where the emails or messages that are sent out are crafted to target the individual that it's specifically being sent to. So it's not going to be a situation where it's kind of like a mass email that's sent out to just an email list. They try to do background research and will try to, send it out to a specific person, maybe like an accounts payable person that they know is going to be in charge of paying invoices. Whaling is somewhat the same as spear phishing, except it's more to target high-level executives, like maybe a CFO or CEO. And then vishing is actually a form of phishing where rather than sending you a message, they'll call you on the phone and try to impersonate somebody from maybe like a vendor or from like a financial institution. So what do you look for possible signs of phishing? The first is going to be just something that's unsolicited out of the blue that you're not expecting. All of a sudden, maybe you receive an email from a vendor asking for payment on an invoice that you're not even aware of or expecting. You need to keep an eye out for the email signature, the name. You need to, just check the properties of every email that you received if it's not internal, and just check, is the actual email address that it's coming to the same as the display name of the email. One of the things you can do, I know in Outlook it's an option, you can actually change your settings to display not just the name of the person that it's coming from, but also the email address itself. So you don't even have to do that extra step of hovering over it or opening up the properties for it. You can actually set up Outlook to display it automatically for you. Things to look for, does the email or the message contain poor spelling or grammar? Are there multiple font types? Do they use numbers instead of letters? Do the messages contain images rather than text? One that I've gotten in the past has been telling me there's a problem with my Netflix account, but rather than actually like having a text in the email, it's just a screenshot of an image of a Netflix account. So it's not even tailored specifically to anybody, just a picture. Some other things to keep an eye out for. Are they asking you to use an embedded link in order to access your account or to provide information? And are they asking you to open a specified attachment in the email? And then also you want to look at the properties of the attachment too. Is it really a PDF or is it actually an executable file that they want you to open so they can install some malware on your computer? Things to keep in mind to prevent phishing: always treat all messages as possible threats. If it's not an ongoing message string that you're having with someone, that it's an expected conversation, just always be suspicious of it. Delete any suspicious emails. If you get an invoice from a vendor, you're not expecting it, you have questions about it, you can delete it. I'm sure if it's a good message, they're going to send you another one for follow-up for payment. Verify questionable messages by calling them using a known good phone number. A lot of times it goes along with the phishing. They'll include a phone number to call the questions. You call it, and it's actually a spoofed phone number. It may look like the vendor's phone number or a related phone number to it, but it goes directly to the scammer. You can actually set up on a lot of systems automatic flagging for external emails so that when your email comes into your inbox, there's an automatic flag on the top of it saying that it's from an external email account. That is something that our office has, and it's one of the ways that we flagged in an example that I'll show you in a minute. You can also set up to implement automatic filters of known spam on your email gateways, depending on the email provider or the internet provider that you have or your email system you have installed. And you can also set it up so that it flags or removes questionable attachments. So we have this in our office. We receive an email, there's a zip file or some form of questionable attachment to it. The email will still come through, but the attachment is automatically zipped and encrypted, and only our IT department can provide us with the decryption code for it. So it's kind of a method to allow us to still be able to receive our email, but not necessarily even have an opportunity to open up one of those suspicious attachments. So if you're a victim of phishing, what do? The first thing you do is change your password automatically to whatever you would have provided. And we always recommend that you use a strong one-time use unique password. You can use password managers or password generators that are third-party apps that work really well. I know that for myself, I use my iPhone to generate random passwords, and it helps keep track of everything. The next thing you want to do is report the incident to your IT department or your office administrator. Another thing you can do that we'll talk about and walk through an example of how to activate it later is enable multi-factor authentication, which will allow you to be authenticated as the proper user through more than just your user ID and password. And then you want to continuously monitor your accounts and systems for malware and any unusual activity, whether it's banking or any other account that might have been compromised. So this is an example of phishing that was received by our office. The email was made to appear to come from our chief information officer, and it was sent to one of our IT workers. And essentially, some of the quick things to look at is automatically, you can see it first, it's from a Gmail address and not an LLA, that la.gov extension, which is our office extension. And then just some of the language in there, it's not the best grammar. And then you'll see there's some capitalization issues, but then also they used a lowercase l instead of an uppercase I. So just little things to keep a lookout for, and then email me on here, not proper grammar. But also just in general, this isn't how Craig and Perry would interact with each other. These are guys that work together every day, and it's just the attempt to be formal in this email just really stands out. And then one other thing is, they capitalized high. So just kind of one example that our office receives, and our office is very good about sending out examples like this just to keep us aware, because one of the things that I'll talk about in a minute, but you really do want to try to create that culture of always looking for having a high security sense. Like you want to always be aware of who you're receiving information from, who you're sending it to, and always question everything. So another example, this is one that we received that was made to look like it came from JP Morgan Chase. As you can see, the email that it's from is not a JP Morgan Chase email. And then it uses some English spelling of words and grammar. And then later on, further down in the email, it had a link for us to go to fill out a form. So when you hover over it, you actually see that the actual email address is not for Chase. So just another example of one that our office has actually received. So to talk about another form of scam that is out there is ransomware. This really is the second most utilized form of cyber crime, and it really goes along with phishing. The majority of ways that malware gets installed on computers, for ransomware comes through the form of phishing. And so what ransomware does is you accidentally open up, an attachment that looked like a PDF, but is actually an executable file that was sent in an email. It installs malware on your computer that starts to encrypt the files on your computer. It can move from individual machines to your network, and essentially it makes your files and your systems unusable. And what typically happens is it's followed up with a ransom demand for the decryption code. A lot of times, the bad actors will then also breach your system and take the data as well. And then in addition to ransoming the decryption key so you can get your data back, they'll then later ransom, ask for a ransom in order to not publish the data that they stole from you on the web. And so when this happens, it's referred to as double extortion, and it's something that typically happens in almost every case where there is when there's a ransomware and file encryption.
And actually, this happened to one of our auditors probably about 10 years ago. So on your computer, you know, you have the camera for virtual meetings and things. It actually, he clicked on a link on the Advocate's website, the newspaper, and it was a bad link. And it took a picture of him through that camera, and it showed him the picture of himself and said that he had been looking at child porn materials and so on and so forth. He became very concerned because he was not doing that. But our office had a plan in place. He immediately contacted IT, who segregated his computer away from everything else. And to my knowledge, nothing got compromised through that. But, you know, it can be that scary. So Brent and I always keep our cameras covered unless we're in a meeting, just in case, for that reason.
Yeah. So what can you do to prevent and to mitigate instances where you might, you know, have accidentally installed some malware on your computer? The first and most important thing to do is maintain offline backups of your system, or at the very least your critical data. That way, if you are breached, you have an attack, you at least have that backup that you can restore if you can't decrypt the files yourself. You want to also create and implement and maintain an incident response plan. I'll go into a little bit of detail in a minute or two about what's included in those, but it can be, you know, the very basic thing where these are our machines that are on the network, so we know what we may have to disconnect, and these are the contact information for DOA, our local law enforcement, anybody that we may need to get in contact if we have a breach. Some other things you can do is to not expose your access to your internal source systems on the internet. You know, don't leave an open portal on your website to access your internal systems for people that might be working remotely. You also can conduct regular scanning to identify any vulnerabilities in your systems, whether it's through your website or through your network. Chris kind of talked about a link that you can go to have that run by CISA. And then, of course, you always want to regularly patch and update your software. Turning on your automatic updates, especially for Windows, is one of the best things that you can do to keep up to date on that. So what do you do if you are breached? You want to determine which systems were impacted and isolate them. If you can't isolate them, you want to power down the devices that were affected, and you know, if you can't disconnect them from the network. You want to triage the systems that were impacted, see if there is any way to recover any data that has been affected. And then you want to identify the accounts and users that are involved and see what you can do to provide additional training after the fact to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So what other things can we do for prevention and response? Well, for prevention, you can conduct a self-assessment, create policies and procedures and put them in place, provide training on those policies and procedures. And Chris talked about it a little bit at the beginning. Our office, we weren't involved in the creation of the policy procedures for the cybersecurity of our office. But one of the things our office does is we receive large data sets of, you know, from different state agencies that contain quite a bit of personal identifying information. And so we help to create and implement the policies that our office has put in place internally for how those data sets are handled, who needs to be contacted, and who has access to the different versions of that. And one of the things that I'll also mention in a minute is that we worked very closely with our legal department to do it. So when you're creating these plans and policies, we always recommend that you get with your legal department, whether it's internal or external, to kind of go over and make sure that what you're trying to implement will actually work and be effective. You want to secure access to external and internal systems. And we say external and internal because not only do you want to prevent yourself from being attacked externally, you want to lock down things internally. And that's one of the things that our policy, our data policy does, is we specify that If someone doesn't need access to something, they shouldn't have it. So for our data sets, only the individuals that are in charge of maintaining those and other individuals that specifically need it for a very specific purpose are even allowed access to it. So you really want to have a situation where people can only access what they need in order to do the basic things of their job. So another example at our office is in the performance section and in all other sections, there's different projects, different project folders for the different projects that we're doing. I can't access a project that another team is doing, even though we're in the same section. I can only access the files and the projects of my own that I'm currently conducting myself. And so it's another layer of security that we internally maintain, where even people in the same department can't access certain files. And then again, I talked about offline data backups already, but then also require strong one-time use passwords and multi-factor authentication. I'm going to keep saying it over and over again throughout the presentation today. Strong one-time use passwords and multi-factor authentication. Those are the two biggest things you can implement, on a very quick and easy basis to protect yourself from being attacked. So for self-assessment, some of the things you should ask yourself: does your agency have written policies and procedures already? Do you have a plan? Like, what do you do if you are attacked? Who do you call? How do you handle your network? Do you power it down? Do you have to disconnect? Does your agency allow remote access to internal systems? Is this another layer? If you do, that's going to be another layer of protection and security that you have to keep in mind and account for. Does your agency automatically require multi-factor authentication in order to access not only your network, but maybe even just your email system? And does your agency limit employee access internally to different systems? So kind of things I've already talked about, but again, repetition is kind of what we have been wanting to get at with this. So there's some sources right here that you can go to perform your own self-assessment and to give you some additional ideas. CISA, the National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center, and DOA's Emergency Support Function. They're another agency that, they are there for all the local government and the state government in the state to just call, and they can provide guidance on things. So some other internal control best practices: adopt a least privilege policy, and that's essentially kind of what I talked about. Users should only have the minimum access needed to do their jobs. Separate duties. I know that that's going to be a topic later on today regarding financial duties, but we want to divide tasks and responsibilities among different users. And then conduct regular access reviews. One of the things that we come across a lot in performing audits is the fact that agencies don't always disconnect access to former employees. If someone is a former employee or they've changed departments, you need to always be reviewing access for what they had and if it needs to be changed or disconnected. It's something that isn't always on top of mind, but it's extremely important, especially if you have former employees that might still possibly be able to access your system remotely. So one of the things about prevention is coming up with an incident response plan. And I know that for all levels of government and for all different sizes of local government, this may seem like something that is a big task, but really it doesn't have to be. I know that having worked in local governments, for several years before I moved over to performance, I've been there where you have like the two employees and, they both have their own computers and their own machines, and that's it. Like, I get it. And so you don't need to have an in-depth plan, but it helps to have something in place to let you know, okay, here's who we need to call if something happens, this is what we need to do, and here's the contact information for it. So what do you do to create an incident plan? Kind of walk through that self-assessment process, put some ideas down, just review with your legal staff what these policies are and the ideas that you think you want to implement. But then also you want to establish a culture of security. You want to always, and I know everybody gets tired of hearing about phishing, but you always just want to make sure that all of your employees understand they have to be on alert at all times, because it's a situation where if you don't continue to enforce that, people can get lax and not keep an eye out for things, and that's how phishing scams can happen. You also want to train staff on your plan that you develop, and you want to develop an internal inventory of critical data, and also, as I've said before, create offline backups for it. It also helps to meet with your local law enforcement team, know who specifically you can contact directly so you don't have to go through that process when you're trying to respond to a possible breach. You can also do it on a state level with DOA's office. Some other things to keep in mind, print hard copies of your plan. If you're a victim of malware or ransomware, you may not be able to access electronic files on any of your devices. So you want to have a hard copy printed out of your plan, your contacts, and any critical documents that you may need in case of an attack. Also develop an incident staffing and stakeholder plan. Know who the people that you need to contact are, and who within your own agencies is going to be the main points of contact for how to handle and respond to an attack. You're going to want to review this plan, at least quarterly, and then if necessary, you may want to check technical resources or firms, or even put somebody on retainer. Other things you can do is they actually have insurance policies for cyber attacks, where you can get an insurance policy and insure yourself against possible cyber attacks. And in some of the examples we have at the end, we'll show where that was the case, and because they had that insurance in place, they were able to recover some funds that they had taken. And last, you may want to conduct an attack simulation exercise just to see if we are locked down from malware or some other kind of attack. How do we respond to it? During a cybersecurity incident, this is something that goes along with planning. We assign an incident manager who's going to be in charge of managing everything that's going on and responding. You're going to want to assign a tech manager who is going to be the person in charge of dealing with the technical response to it. And that's really going to be more involved with, this is going to be the person that's going to know the systems internally, what needs to be disconnected, how can we try to save anything from possibly being affected further. And then assign a communications manager who's going to correspond with the external agencies on how to handle it, and to hopefully be requesting help.
And again, depending on the size of the local government, there may only be a few employees, total. And so this is really maybe not new positions, but really who's going to fulfill this role as a part of a cybersecurity incident.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then after an incident, we want to hold a formal meeting to see what you could have done to prevent any attacks, and what you can change in your policies and procedures in the future. And then you're going to want to communicate those findings to your staff and train them up on it. So, simple things that you can do to implement change to keep yourself safe, and these are things that you can do today, for the most part. Turn on multi-factor authentication. You can update your software, turn on automatic updates. You can train your employees or correspond with them and let them know that they really need to think before they click on external links or attachments. Because again, more than 90% of successful cyber attacks start with phishing. And use strong passwords. You can use a password manager to generate and store unique passwords. I kind of mentioned that with my iPhone. It'll do that, has a built-in app for it. But then there's also third-party apps that you can download and use for that. One of the things that I have heard in other classes that we've taken is that it's actually safer to use an extremely strong, unique password and then write it down and keep it at your desk than it is to use the same strong password over and over again for different accounts. Some other things that you can do that may need to be implemented by your IT department is you can implement controls for accessing public Wi-Fi hotspots, where essentially your governmental agency devices are not allowed to connect to a public Wi-Fi hotspot because they're easily breached. You can implement controls that will prevent the downloading and installation of unapproved applications on your devices. This is something our office actually does. If we have to have a new form of software installed for pretty much any reason, we actually have to have our IT department do it on our machines. And then you can implement controls over flash devices and other portable storage devices. In our office, if we plug in a USB device to our machine, the device is automatically encrypted, and it's a form of protection against our office not only having things put on to our machines, but then any files that we put onto an external hard drive, they're automatically encrypted. And you have to either have the decryption key, which is separate on a different device, or you have to have the password in order to view those files. So it's a method to not only prevent files from being put onto our system, but to protect anything that leaves our system. So multi-factor authentication, I've kind of brought it up a couple times. So, talk about it. So single-factor authentication is just your username and your password. That's your regular login for pretty much any type of account that you may have. Multi-factor authentication is that additional layer of protection. It's the most common one that you can probably think of is you log into your account and they say, hey, we're going to text you a code. You get the code, text to you, and then you enter it in. That's multi-factor authentication. One of the things that I've read recently, especially I've read a bunch of examples of it happening in New Orleans, is people getting their cell phones stolen, and then within an hour they're locked out of their account and people have access to their banking and everything. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they get their iPhone stolen because the person watched them enter their code, and then when they start logging in for all these accounts, because they've been able to access the password manager, the multi-factor authentication just goes as a text message to their phone, and they're not using like a third-party app that requires another layer of logging in for security. So, having it texted to your phone isn't always the best way to do it. There's other methods that you can use, but it's better than just, not having anything else at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through how to turn on multi-authentication for a Google account. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I think actually at this point it was more than 60 of the registrations for this conference today came from a Gmail account. So I figured, at the very least, maybe we might help 60 people be able to turn on multi-factor authentication. So all you would need to do is you log into your Google account and you can go to your security tab. And it's very simple. Then you just go down and you click on how you sign in to Google, two-step verification. And then once you click on that, you'll come to this screen, which lets you choose the type of multi-factor authentication you want to use. I don't have all of them up on here, but the first two are as an email, second one is as a text message, and then you have these three additional ones, a backup code that you choose on your own and you print out one time and maintain wherever you want. Then the other two are an authenticator app, like a third-party application, which Microsoft and Google both offer those. And then lastly is going to be a security key that they will create and that you save either on your phone or on a flash drive. It's essentially an electronic key that you then have to connect to the system in order for it to work. Another thing that Google will do is it'll let you have the option of using another Google app to act as the third-party authentication. So, for instance, you log in, you can say, hey, it'll ask you to verify by just opening up, maybe YouTube on your phone, which is a known device. So there's multiple ways that they've set it up to try to make it easy to allow you to use multi-factor authentication. And so with that, Chris is going to go over a couple of examples of some data breaches and some other cybersecurity attacks that we've had in Louisiana.
Yeah, so what we're hoping is the various things that we've talked about, you'll be able to pull certain things that fit for your organization. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but it is you need to have certain elements of the things that we talked about so you can prevent and respond to these incidents. And through these examples, this is where I have to give my disclaimer. Unfortunately, for almost every example except for one, that governmental entity is in attendance, so sorry. But it's good examples to show that this really can happen to your neighbor, to yourself, to others. And we'll talk about how some of these attacks, because the entities had certain parts of these plans involved, they were able to mitigate the actual cost of the attack. So the first one, Jefferson Parish Clerk of Court. So in September of 2021, the court suffered a malware attack, so one of the main ones that we were talking about, and it disabled the online database for a month. And often, whenever we think about these attacks, we think about it happening to the entity itself that was attacked, but often it has kind of this spreading effect. And this is an example of that. There were 3 courts that were unable to use the information from this database, and so court proceedings were disrupted because of this. Xavier University, and you'll see there's various types of local and governmental entities that are used as examples here. So we've got a university. November of 2022, there was a network disruption and a data breach, and a month later, they were asked to pay a ransom. The FBI says do not pay ransoms, primarily for 2 reasons. One, because there's no guarantee that you're actually going to get your data back. But then 2, it encourages these bad actors to continue to try to perpetrate these activities because they see that there is some success rate. The downside of that, though, is once this ransom was not paid, this ransomware gang, and there are, like I said at the beginning, gangs, crime syndicates who this is what they do on a daily basis. They publish this breach data online. And with it being a university, of course, 3 months later, they had to send out an email to 44,000 students, employees, vendors, saying your personal identifying information has been breached. And now those individuals, again, kind of the spreading effect, now these individuals are going to have to monitor their credit and do various things for the foreseeable future. Port of South Louisiana. So in September 2021, a phishing attack occurred and resulted in the loss of almost $500,000. As Brent mentioned earlier, as a part of their plan, they had insurance coverage that covered them up to $250,000 of this loss. So they were able to recover some of the money that happened in this incident. School boards, there's quite a few examples of school boards being hit. Calcasieu Parish School Board, another phishing scam, led to payments to scammers. What's interesting is once the school board put in a policy that should be a part of an incident response plan, which is once a vendor requests a change order, they called the vendor to confirm that that change order was actually legitimate, and that could be implemented in a variety of ways. The vendor said, no, this change order is not legitimate, and neither are the ones in the past. And this led to this will prevent things in the future. Unfortunately, it wasn't in place whenever this occurred. They have been able to recover about half of those dollars at the time that an audit was conducted. City of New Orleans. So this is really, you can see it both glass half full and half empty through this example. So New Orleans had an incident response plan. Through this response plan, they're constantly monitoring for suspicious activity on their network and on their servers. Not only did they have a plan, but they've also went through the various exercises that Brent talked about earlier to see if their plan actually worked. So they really got everything in place here to prevent, detect, and mitigate this incident. And once they identified the suspicious activity, they immediately implemented their plan. However, despite all of this, they still have recovery costs expected to total over $5 million. So glass half empty would say, well, what's the purpose of putting together all this plan if you can still be hit with this type of attack? The other side would kind of go back to a statistic that we said earlier. Those entities with an incident response plan reduce the cost of attacks by 61%. So based on that, this number would be much higher if the city did not have this type of a plan. And then another school system, St. Landry. In January of 2020, an attack caused the school system to go offline with technology for 2 weeks. I'm not sure about anyone in the audience, but in Ascension Parish, starting in 3rd grade, every kid gets a Chromebook, and that's what they do all their homework and classwork on until they graduate. They continue to get those. So not having that being disrupted with technology for 2 weeks I'm not sure how they would get their work done. I guess they'd have to go back to the chalkboard and the dry erase boards. But this is an example where it's not all, we always think about this in terms of dollars or personally identifying information, but this is a side effect where kids are not learning the way that they know how to learn for at least a 2-week period. So there really are many types of effects to think about. The good thing is they had some of their other information kind of segregated out with a vendor, and so it wasn't affected by it. Yeah, so a few years later, another cyber attack occurred with St. Landry, and it resulted in the theft of over 200,000 files. A cybercrime syndicate, as it was described, demanded a $1 million ransom, which again was not paid. Kind of following the Xavier example, 1 month later, once the ransom wasn't paid, these files were leaked online, and again, kind of the same story, personally identifying information, records, income tax records, a lot of things that can lead to some serious damage for those people financially going forward. And going back to the incident response plan, or in this case, a lack of one, what occurred here and what it was kind of traced back to was an office clerk's desktop computer is where a lot of these files were stored. And so really making sure that people have their files on a secure network, not on their desktop, but also that they only have access to those things that they need, like Brent was describing earlier, could have potentially prevented this. And so I think we have a few minutes. Brent was just going to go over a few other examples before we wrap up. Is your microphone on? Microphone may be dead. Okay. Just turn it on.
Okay. So to give you all a couple more examples of ones that are not necessarily publicly known or that may have only been reported in a financial audit. And we're going to go over a couple of different versions of phishing. The majority of all of these are a result of phishing attacks. So in 2019, a college was a victim of a phishing attack where the emails that came in requested employee direct deposit accounts be changed and updated. That resulted in $9,000 of payments being made to accounts that were not actually owned by the employees that were changed. In 2019, a parish agency suffered the same type of attack where direct deposit information for employees was requested to be changed and resulted in $2,600 of payments that were not recovered. And then in 2022, the same type of attack was received by a school board, and direct deposit payroll information was requested to be changed and $5,000 was lost. Those numbers, seem low, but again, over time, this can happen multiple times, just like we saw with St. Landry. So you always want to be on the lookout. But another type of phishing attack, that we see more often than not is going to be vendors requesting payment changes or sending in invoices for work that wasn't necessarily performed. So an example is in 2018, a college in Louisiana received a $14,000 invoice for payment from a known vendor and went ahead and paid it, and was later found to have been a phishing email. In 2018, another college had a vendor payment issue with a phishing email and resulted in $59,000 of payments going to, a scammer. Essentially, as we go on, in 2020, a parish had the same type of attack, which totaled $130,000 in payments. In 2022, a school board had a vendor phishing scheme that happened to them, which resulted in $250,000 worth of payments. Another school board in 2022 resulted in $138,000 of payments. This one was interesting because for this one, the scammer actually intercepted both the vendor's emails and the school board's emails and was modifying both of them, to each other, so that it appeared that the school board actually was corresponding directly with the vendor and vice versa. And so, you always want to stay vigilant. You always want to train your staff to keep an eye out for things. And if you implement some of the things that we recommended, it can really help to, mitigate some of these instances, especially when it comes to the employees that were requesting the changes to their payroll deposits. If external flagging had been set up on those emails, there's a good chance that they would have noticed that it wasn't coming from internal employees.
Yep. So like I said earlier, especially with a lot of those FBI crime statistics, there's publicly known ones that I talked about. There's ones that have come out not in the public, but have come to our office and things like Brent was talking about. And then there's many, many other unknown ones. And so this is really happening often out there. And so again, kind of in the theme of what we've been doing throughout this hour, at the end here, we put a lot of various resources where you can go. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. So there's so many resources out there that we've tried to condense them down to a few where we found very valuable information from a state or local government perspective. And we've tried to include those websites there for you. And so I think we're about out of time, but if there were any questions, Brent and I will be here to answer any until the next class, basically. So thank you.